Tom Harwood, who is a British political commentator, he has a job with GB News now. He used to work for Guido Fawkes, the online sort of right-wing tabloid. Tweeted something that I think is really fascinating, that kind of shows off the significant issues with the way a lot of people think of the economy in the UK, especially people on the right. So he tweeted this: "The productive bit of the economy has shrunk while the stuff it pays for expands. Utterly unsustainable." And he's attached here a lovely graph of average weekly earnings for the private sector compared with the public sector. So that only takes place over the course of, well, about a year and a half, right? And it basically shows that the public sector is earning slightly more than the private sector. And during the worst part of the pandemic, the lockdowns in 2020, public sector pay went up, whereas private sector pay went down significantly. And now there's still quite a big gap between them. What Harwood is saying is the private sector is the productive bit of the economy, and the stuff it pays for, well, that's the public sector, right? And he's saying that it's unsustainable. So I think this is a really great opportunity to talk about the public sector and how valuable it is. So there have been numerous studies throughout the years that have demonstrated very clearly how important jobs in the public sector are to the economy. Matters of public health, matters of security, matters of education, matters of transportation, all kinds of different things are very important for the wealth of the country. Teachers generate a tremendous amount of wealth, far more than what they earn. And you see that in a lot of different avenues of the public sector. The things I mentioned before, as well as sanitation. There are all kinds of ways that the public sector hugely benefits society. Now, yes, the funding from the public sector of the public sector comes from taxation, primarily of the private sector. However, that money, if it's spent correctly, if investment is strategic and smart, which you could argue it isn't in a lot of ways right now, but when it is, you get huge returns. That is, if you are spending money where it generates wealth. That's in healthcare, that's in security and crime prevention, that's in anti-poverty policies, that's in education, that's in transportation, that's in infrastructure, that's in public works programs, sanitation, and the list goes on and on and on and on and on. That generates a tremendous amount of wealth, much more than it costs through taxation. So the public sector actually generates a lot of wealth. So that is part of the productive bit of the economy. So Tom Harwood is totally wrong there. The public sector, there is no productive bit and the bit that the productive bit pays for. There's none of that. There are the productive parts of the economy, and then there are the parts where people just shift wealth from one place to another, right? Which is the financial sector primarily. And the financial, of course, you need to have a financial sector. However, what you really don't need to have is a really deregulated one, where it no longer just greases the wheels of industry. It actually accounts for a huge amount of the economy, because that ends up destroying wealth. And there's a great article that we'll link below in the description about why it really shouldn't pay to be a banker. And that might sound a bit extreme, a bit radical even. But I encourage you to read the full thing because it is very interesting. So that makes no sense, first off, right? Investing in the public sector isn't only something you should do while the private sector is flying and doing really well. It's something you should do all the time. And in fact, when the private sector is doing badly, you should invest more in the public sector because it generates so much wealth. It improves the material living of working people, puts more money in the pockets of average people, gives them way more opportunities, and helps educate children better and look after people when they're sick, reduce crime. All of these things are so important to the wealth of a country. So That's a total misconception. And the second thing is, essentially, what Harwood is saying is the productive bit isn't doing all that well, right? However, he's really kind of just ignoring the vast majority of the evidence that demonstrates, no, actually, all the productivity in this country, in the private sector and the public sector, and indeed every developed country in the world, has been steadily improving for many decades now. In fact, there was an analysis that showed that if wages had kept pace with productivity increases and inflation in the US since the 1960s, the minimum wage in America would be $24 an hour. $24 an hour. It's currently about $7.50 minimum wage. If you adjust that to the UK, it's somewhere between 15 and 16 pounds, I believe. So an hour minimum wage isn't even £10 an hour. So clearly there's some misconception there, isn't there? Because workers are getting more and more productive. So Tom Harwood is totally wrong about that. They don't, it's not as if we're putting more and more money into the public sector, which somehow is not very productive and not responsible for generating a lot of wealth, which of course it is. While the private sector is just sort of plateauing. It's not that at all. It's getting more and more productive all the time. And that's not just people getting more productive, that's technology, that's automation, and all of those kind of things. And of course automation is a huge point of anxiety for a lot of workers because they're terrified about losing their jobs, which it shouldn't be. It should be the kind of thing where we're all like, oh, that's fantastic. I won't have to work as many hours and I'll be able to do what I want, and this wealth will be generated by machines now. And doesn't that sound like a lovely future? Well, not under the current economic system we have. If automation keeps going the way it is, it's just going to result in mass unemployment and underemployment. People work in jobs where they don't work enough hours or whatever to get paid decent wages, because of course we have a very top-heavy economy where a lot of the power and the wealth is concentrated in the hands of a very small number of very, very, very wealthy people. So his diagnosis of the problems with the economy are so wrong on those two levels, because A, the public sector is extremely important as an asset to the productive capacity of the economy. It's actually responsible for a hell of a lot of investment in fixed capital. That is the productive capacity of the economy. We're talking about manufacturing and things like that, industry. And in terms of the private sector, it's not productive enough. It's just that the private sector is engineered in such a way that the people who control the flow of the capital and the people who control the wages are the ones who are very, very wealthy at the top of these extremely large mega corporations who just don't want to pay people higher wages. They just don't want to, right? Like I said, wages would be a lot higher now if they'd actually kept pace with worker productivity increases and inflation since the 60s. That's just a fact. So we need to understand that the problems that we have in the economy today are not problems of overinvestment in the public sector. They're not problems of people not working hard enough or people not working long enough. People are working too long. People are working very hard. Workers are far more productive than they ever used to be. Technology should be making our lives much, much easier and increasing prosperity all around, but it's for the most part not. And the public sector isn't getting invested in enough because it is very, very valuable to the economy. Like I said, in so many different ways. So let's reevaluate our economic priorities, shall we? Because if we strengthen trade unions, which actually Labour have been talking about recently, which I'm very, very happy about, strengthen trade unions, maybe implement policies of employee ownership and workplace democracy. I think that's a fantastic idea. So we have more equitable workplaces and people have control over their own livelihoods more. Wages become fairer. If we increase the minimum wage to a living wage and tie it to worker productivity increases and inflation, if we make sure that we're actually forcing these mega corporations like Amazon, Google, Facebook, Apple, etc. to pay their taxes, if we close those tax loopholes and invest them in healthcare and reverse NHS privatisation and in the police force, the fire service, education especially, infrastructure development, sanitation, transportation, and if we make sure that people can't squeeze people's wages while we're investing loads of money bailing out the banks next time some horrendous crash happens, or giving loads of money in public contracts to people who happen to be donors to the Conservative Party, then maybe we'll actually, if we do all those changes, which sounds like a lot, but it's really not that much, if we do all that, we will see an incredible difference in the way the UK economy works. And I think people's livelihoods will be massively improved, and the prosperity and living standards of the British people will be tremendously, will have a tremendous improvement as well. So I just thought I'd talk about that because I think that's it was a perfect opportunity to do that. So what do you guys think? I mean, do you think that Harwood actually has a point with what he's talking about? Do you think I've misinterpreted what he was trying to say? Do you agree with me? Do you think we need to be, doing more to empower working people? And do you think the public sector is actually not nearly valued enough in terms of its economic benefit as well as its moral and ethical benefit? I want to hear your thoughts, so leave them in the comments below. And as always, thank you all very much for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.